Howdy everybody, this is Odd Job Entertainment bringing you another video, and we are continuing our rework of the Constellation series of ships, but we're actually going to take a look at some of the very useful features of SolidWorks using a much more simple project to demonstrate. What you see on screen is a router radius guide. So you can equip a router with a bearing guided bit. Those can be a little more expensive and you might not always have the correct shape that you want. Another option is you can use a bushing on your router. And a bushing is just a static piece of metal that sits underneath the router plate, and it prevents the bit from exceeding past in any guide that's pressed up against the bushing. Sorry. So this is a guide that I designed in order to be able to do consistent radiused corners. It allows you to do interior corners and exterior corners. And it's got a couple unique features set up. First off, we've got this lip. This is intended to be a little bit bigger than the offset between your bushing and the bit. And the first time that you use this, you'd 3D print this, and then you would trim this lip to be exactly the right size. And that helps you line it up perfectly, regardless of any tolerances or different kinds of geometry that may be on your router. And this gives you a very consistent edge that you can then reference in the future. But not everybody needs to make a 6 centimeter radius turn, right? And so what I've done here is I've given this various configurations. So if I go over here to the configurations tree, which from our features, it's just a couple tabs over, and I double click one of these, it updates the model, changes the text, and now we have a 5 centimeter radius turn. What if I want 2 centimeters? Okay, well I can do 2 centimeters as well. 4, yep, still works. 3 also works. So it's very powerful being able to set up different configurations, but how am I doing this? Well, I'm going through the equations and I'm changing the intended radius variable that I've set up, and then all the math that relies on that gets updated in the model through the feature tree. So if I want to make this an 8 centimeter turn, I can do that, and when I change it, I have the option of having it apply to this configuration, all configurations, or I can specify which configurations. I'm just playing with the default configuration now. That's what I'm going to kind of leave as the one that users can play with. But there we go. Now we have an 8 centimeter radius turn. And the other thing that we're doing is it's dynamically updating the text. Now that's not going to be as important for the Constellation series, but when you're printing off a tool that's meant to help you in the real world, I'm sure you can imagine it'd be pretty useful to know what size your tool is. And so that's what that's doing there, is it's updating that text. So the reason I'm showing this is we're about to embark on designing a few things that are going to require different configurations. One of them being seats that go into the cockpit and various other parts of the ship. We want to have a base chair that we then create different configurations for to delineate between co-pilot, captain seat, and maybe just an engineering workstation seat. They're all going to have a similar aesthetic, but they'll have different things added onto them to delineate their role. Another thing is we're going to add engines to the ship, right? Well, we want those engines to be identical but mirrored to each other, and configurations offer an easy way to accomplish that. So I wanted to show the process of how that works before we get into that, because now we're going to start making the geometry for the Constellation, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing. As an added challenge for myself, you'll see that there is a lot of those equation markers on this design. Everything that is a length or width or some linear measurement, I'm trying to reference the same base unit measurement that I set up in the equation sheet. What that allows me to do is I can create different sizes of the engine very quickly to try out different fitments on the ship. I do make a couple mistakes where I lose that golden path and I don't reference perfectly that equation, but I do go back and fix it, and eventually we're able to get a design that is actually quite easy to update. This isn't going to be possible in every engineering project you're working on. Sometimes you're going to have very set fixed dimensions, and you can't have every other linear measurement rely on the same number. But in this case, where it's entirely freeform and my original design, I get to make all the rules. So I figured this would be a fun challenge for myself to just stretch my legs a little bit and see what we can accomplish, and I think it works out pretty well. Initially here, I'm trying to do a loft using a plane and a triangular sketch, but the loft doesn't like it when you bring things to a perfect sharp corner. So what I'm doing instead is I'm creating a surface model in SolidWorks, and then we're going to convert that into a solid body. Surface modeling is very similar to what you would do in Blender and Maya. It's the same kinds of concepts. In this case, it's all about getting that thickness built into the model so that SolidWorks then knows that this has structure and form, mass, weight, all those good things that happen in the real world. But it does have a pretty robust set of surface modeling features. I will say I like Fusion 360's a little more. There's been some projects that I've worked on where it seems like Fusion 360 just handles it a little better. But that's how it is with any kind of software suite, right? You don't want to learn just one. You want to be well versed in all the products so that you can use the tools as needed. And now that we've got the base model of the engine done, now we're going to add some geometry to figure out where we're going to put the intake and the outtake. I guess it's not really an intake in the case of a rocket engine. It's in this case of Star Citizen, it's a retro thruster. And here's an area where I get to take a little bit of creative liberty, shall we say. I thought it'd be cool to have these grills going across the front. We do see grill-like structures in the other RSI ships, but not quite like this. This might be a little bit polarizing of a feature, but let me know what you think about it. And then right now I'm doing the whole front of the ship. We're going to, or the whole front of the engine module. We're eventually going to change this to half, and then we're going to use the other half for some other details. Adding some little fillets. Generally speaking, yes, you do want to keep fillets towards the end of the creation process. In this case, we can make an exception because this individual fin is essentially finished, and we do want to copy its geometry to other parts. The way that I'm accomplishing this is using what's called a linear pattern. So it takes your sketch geometry and the features associated with it, and then it moves it on down the line. It's a very similar process to how I created the piping on the bottom of the cargo module in the main body of the ship. We're doing essentially the same thing, just sending it along the front side of the engine module. Added some fillets on the edges of the fin to give it a nice rounded look. And then we're adding a hole with a draft angle to it behind the fins to improve the impression of functionality there. And speaking of functionality, with that other half, we're going to add in the missile bays and a spot where we will eventually have the gimbaled main guns for the pilot. Doing a little quick Google search here to double check my math and make sure I know how many missiles are supposed to be on this thing. And it looks like each missile pod carries 6 missiles, so I'm coming up with kind of a triangular configuration. This is one of the areas that does break later on, because you'll see that we don't have that handy equation marker for these measurements, which means that it's going to break when we change the base unit size. It's easy enough to fix, but I do wish that I had caught this in the process I'm in right now, because I essentially do have to remake this later on. But it is what it is. So I don't think that we're going to make these missiles actually detachable from the model ship. I don't think that that's a play feature that I really want to invest that much time into. But as long as they're there, at least aesthetically, it'll look good when it's sitting on a pedestal, right? Here we're trimming up the back to give more of a fastback look to the engine pod. And then we're going to add some fillets on some of the major corners just to make it a little nicer when you're holding this in your hands. And we're going to create some configurations here. I'll tell you right now, the process that I used to do this, it does need a little bit of work. Configurations are a new feature that I haven't played with before, so I've been doing some studying, trying to teach myself how they work. Eventually we do get there, but I do struggle with some aspect of getting the correct body to show up at the right time in the correct configuration. That causes some issues with the Visualize software later on, which is what you can use to create better looking renders from a SolidWorks file. We do fix that, but like I said, it's a learning process. We all make mistakes. Here is where I'm fixing one such mistake and going back and referencing my base unit size in order to make it so that this geometry will scale properly when we change that size. The way that you do this is you can actually just type in full-on equations like you would in an Excel shell, in an Excel cell. So you start with the equal sign, reference your variable, and then apply some math to it, doing something like multiply by 0.2, and that would give you 2/10 of the base unit size. So here you can see that we have a little bit of overlap. When we do the mirror function to create the different configurations, you have to go through and delete that body. And here I feel like the engines are just a little bit too big. I changed the base unit size from 5 to 10. So this engine is now twice as big as it was in all major dimensions. And it looks just a little too big for this ship. I find that the bigger the engine module is, the more enterprise-ish the ship looks. And can't have that. I don't really like Star Trek. Please be sure and argue about that in the comments section. It will be great for engagement. Anyways, here we are fixing the size. We're going to take it down to 7.5. I think we end up at 8. It's been a while. It's been a whole 8 hours since I was working on this. And my brain is tired, guys. But here we're adding some geometry to make it so that it's easy to mount this thing. Originally I was thinking about incorporating some kind of rail idea. I may still do that, but at least for the time being, I just need some real basic struts to get this mounted onto the ship so I can see where it's going to sit, at least in its flight configuration. The rail would allow it to move forward a little bit, and depending on whether it's in landed mode or flying mode. Not as important for the top engines, but it would be more applicable to the bottom engines. The reason why I'm tempted to keep this the way it is, though, is when we actually do check the center of gravity, it's right about perfect over the bottom engines, which means that this ship would be pretty stable while sitting on its haunches. And so the original ship does have movable engines. I don't know that they're really necessary in this case. And speaking of the Enterprise, it definitely looks Enterprise-ish here with the very high and to the side struts that we have going on right now. We also need to sweep them back a bit, which doesn't help the Enterprise look, but eventually we're going to bring them a lot closer to the main ship body, and that's going to fix that Enterprise look. and make it look more like an RSI ship at least. I do have a pretty cool announcement. We do have our first Orbital Bombardier member tier. That is courtesy of John Best, who should be seeing his name on screen. Thank you for your support. There are a link in the description if you would like to join. Being a member just helps me create quality content like this. If you enjoy it and you want to support, that's one way to do so. It's not required though, so thank you for the generosity of the members that we do have, and yeah, I'd be doing this anyway, so feel free to watch for free. I'm not going to be upset, but members like John Best do make this possible for me to get a bit more done, so thank you for that. Here we've got 2 engines mounted, and this is the epitome of Enterprise-ish appearance for this ship, so we need to quickly get those other 2 engines added. And that's where we start to run into some of the issues with the configurations. This isn't a fault of SolidWorks, this is a fault of me not quite sure what I'm doing. Eventually I do get it fixed, but while things may look correct aesthetically in the model here on screen, once I load it into Visualize, we see that we run into some issues. And speaking of Visualize, that's something that you haven't seen me use before. I've done it in the background to create the renders that you've seen on Discord or on the channel, but Visualize is the graphic rendering side of the SolidWorks software suite. So as I'm going through adding the different appearances for the materials, those get copied over into Visualize, and then Visualize does a much better job of actually rendering those out. And if you are working for a customer, this is how you would create the visuals for the model that you're showing before maybe going into the production phase of things, getting some feedback on the shape of the model, things that they want to change, stuff like that. So it's a very powerful rendering software, but in my experience, it's not as flexible as some more cinematics, shall we say, styles of software, but you can do some really cool stuff with this. My skill in it, very, very basic, and you can see that reflected here. Those ugly gray sections, those are the bodies from the different configurations that we need to destroy and get rid of. I do figure out how to do it, but it does take me a minute, and then we have to fix the appearances as well. But eventually we get a model that we can then do some work with and get some really nice looking renders. Hopefully I do get to that in this clip. I don't know if I recorded that section of it though. So I'm learning right along with you guys. What did I record or not? But the process basically boils down to I need to go back into the different configurations I saved off, make sure that those bodies were properly deleted. Looks like I did get those bodies properly saved off, so great. I was trying to set up the render queue, and I'm gonna have to look into how to do that. I thought that it would be just as easy as queuing it up like I would in Blender, but there must be some step I'm missing. So I did have to render each image individually, which is a bit of a pain. But here we're taking a look at where that center of gravity is, and as we can see, it's directly over the rear engines. So this is going to be very good from a landing balance perspective. I don't think I'm going to have to implement any kind of rail system to move the engines forward. I think it'll be quite nice and stable just the way it is. Now that we've got the 4 engines on here, we get a real good look at how the ship actually stands. And as we're looking at these renders here, tell me what you think about this part. I'm quite proud of how the ship geometry looks. I think right now it has a very aggressive, almost like Crouching Tiger kind of aesthetic to it, which I'm quite pleased with. One point that I do want to point out again, one point that I want to point to is the struts are going to be a lot thicker in the final model. Like I said before, this is just very basic geometry to figure out where I want those engines mounted, but I think now that I have a good relative position to the body of the ship, I think we can start working on some more characteristic struts, make them pop a little more and not look so dangly. Looking at the bottom of the ship, I think it looks pretty good. I mean, it to me at least, it does evoke that classic Constellation feel while having an updated look. But you're gonna have to tell me what you think. I think those 4 engines really help balance out the look of the ship. Before it looked kind of like a stretched saucer, but now that we've got the engines on it, it looks like this could actually be propelled by them. And I'm gonna let the other renders play out. This is gonna be the end of my commentary, but I just want to have plenty of time for you to pause the video, take a screenshot, maybe squeeze in another ad. I mean, let's be honest, right? But until next time, this is Odd Job Entertainment signing off.